if it's not making money, it's not making sense. I have a daily thing I do every day now, whereby at the end of every business day, I just get on the phone with my co-founder and then we talk. And we talk about everything. It's like therapy. That's the only therapy we know, and that's the only therapy we can afford. The sacrifices um we don't have many if you don't succeed, right? So I and my co-founder, we both had like stable, high income jobs before FINA, and then having to let go of that to build it and go to zero.
Thank you so much, AG, for joining me on the podcast today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Our guest today is the founder of FINA, the new money bank powering your stables lifestyle. With FINA, you can swap between crypto and cash, get access to cash without selling your crypto. And this is crypto loans, which is a very, very amazing feature. You can also send and receive payments seamlessly. It's great to have you here, right? So one of the things that I love to do at Builders Block is to understand the journey of the founder. Basically understanding the human side of the founder. And this is one thing we are trying to unlock at Builders Block. So tell me as much as you can about how you grew up, where you grew up, what was family like, and everything around your background story. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, well, my background is a little bit it's quite interesting. I grew up in Nigeria, northern part of the country. I have both parents still alive to this very day. Um, Both parents are actually business people. So my dad has always been an entrepreneur, and my mom as well. And I'm very close to my mom. And so I grew up in the northern part of the country, like I mentioned, Kaduna to be specific. And my upbringing is very regular, nothing special. I had the opportunity of, having a very interesting childhood where I had lots of friends around. I grew up in a very strong community. You walk to school and back. So I had a lot of time to actually enjoy my childhood. So I played pretty well, studied really hard as well. So I think my upbringing is quite stable, I'll say. I'll call it stable. And then all up to the way I went to the university. So I think that's the best I can share about my upbringing. Very stable, like generic upbringing, nothing special, nothing. It's very basic.
Yeah, awesome. You just want to tell us, are you the first of three or the first of two? You know,
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I have lost siblings. So currently was six. I'm right in the middle. Right, I'm the third. Yeah.
Mm, okay. Interesting. And one of the things that got my attention was growing up in the northern part of the country. Do you want to tell us, some of like your favorite childhood memory growing up in the northern part or in Kaduna to be precise? Like, just tell us two of your favorite childhood memory.
I think one of the favorites I have is I recently reconnected one of my childhood friends recently, and talking to him just kind of like brought all our memories back because we both lived in the same one street, like basically was streets away from each other, and then we attended the same secondary school at the time. So speaking with him, get to hear about some of our other classmates because we were literally classmates, and then we were like neighbors at the same time. So I think one of my favorite things growing up was the sense of community I had from school and back home because one of where we were staying, the block of flats we were staying, one of my neighbor as well was my classmate. So it was overwhelming at times when you think about it. Like I said, I have very active childhood. So to have that's assembly of quality friends and family. It's just thinking about it now, how life is as an adult, everything is siloed, you just stay and work, and then you have one friend in different parts of all your friends are scattered all around the continent, all around the world actually. And even in Lagos, it takes a lot of effort, to actually see people that you call friends, and you see them once a month or once a while and this is coming from someone that actually grew up in a place whereby I had friends every day. Like I said, I had a very active childhood. So as just thinking about it, I never got to realize how blessed I was growing up in terms of like the friends I had. Obviously, there are always the adventures you have as a kid growing up where you get into trouble, you get into fights and stuff like that. But I think this one is the one of the most one of the the most like the best that I've got to realize because of where we are right now and where we're going as a people in terms of like having phones and how disconnected we are from that sense of community. And this is me speaking them from a point in time where I had like this immense community. To even give you further context, my mom, my grandma lives down the street, like where we're staying. It's a very long street. My grandma lives right down. So, and then she had a shop, and every Friday she likes. So I grew up being a very active person. She likes eating live chicken. So and then she goes buys it, and I am the guy in charge of doing the preparation. Like, so it was a culture I and my grandma had whereby every Friday I just know when to go. I'll go to our shop by 4 p.m. after school. We go to the market to buy the stuff. She hands it over to me. I take it to the house. I'll be the one to kill it, prepare it, and then she gives me my. You understand? So those are the things that I had growing up. So it's amazing. I have to say it's amazing. Like thinking about it now just makes me feel nostalgic. And interestingly, my grandma is still alive. So it's interesting.
Yeah, really amazing. I think that's a really fascinating one. Having to grow up with like sense of community and having everyone around you are pretty much. And now, do you also want to tell us about like your educational background? I want to tie it to you know tell us at 10 years old, what did you think you would become, and what did you later go on to study? You know, connecting all of your educational story together.
All right. So at primary school, which is like the basic, educational system in Nigeria, I wanted to become a Reverend Father. Interesting as that might sound. Yeah, so I grew up a Catholic, and I really, really loved the way how the Reverend Fathers were. They were iron. And to for context, I've grown up to be a very thorough person. Needs tries to keep my environment as neat as possible. So I really like that about them. The white gown, how well put together they were. Uh, like and then obviously I went through the whole process of becoming like go through the system. I wanted to be an author boy, then hopefully from there become a Reverend Father. Then as I grew up into university, as I went into the secondary school, my parents wanted me to become a medical doctor, and I grew up with that notion that, okay, cool, maybe medical doctor might be an improvement of being a religious leader. And that was fine because I thought about it that with a lot of opportunities, you get to save lives. There's a moral obligation from that and the moral, satisfaction that comes from that. And then obviously, they're one of the highest earners in anywhere, in the country at the time. So that kind of like influenced me to study going to the sciences in secondary school. And going to university, my parents wanted me to go to private school, and at the university in question, they didn't have like medicine. So we thought about, okay, let's gravitate towards a course that you go on to become a medical doctor, maybe when you further the education. So that led me to study microbiology. So that's my educational background in a nutshell.
So yeah, really interesting. I think I love the part of wanting to be a reverend father and then, realizing, okay, I think we can do something else. Yeah, so looking back now, what internal traits gave you an edge before you had skill, capital, or network? Looking back from like the journey, what internal trait did you think gave you an edge before you even had skills or like capital or network?
Right. That's a good question. I think that would be my ability to sell and to convince. So to sell, you need to provide a solution, try to convince the person. Obviously, at the base of this, you need to understand the person's pain point and find problems. So I'd say my ability to sell and navigate the world. Thinking about my childhood, I remember one time I'd like to think I have a very strong sense of where things are. So I need to go to somewhere once. Once I go there, I will not forget my way there. So that's kind of like something very interesting I got to realize very early in life. So if you can describe somewhere to me, I'll get there. If I've gone there before, regardless of any part of the world it is, I'll find my way there. So, and that's kind of like, so I just like to think of myself like I'm very structured, and being able to sell, convince the things that I knew from a very early age that's kind of like helped me. So when it comes to having to negotiate through things, to negotiate through life, but then yeah, speaking of which, I got to realize that of course I work closely with my mom. She having a business, so I have to do lots of the some of our logistical like errands and whatnot. I used to do that, so that put me in front of traders from very early age, and that actually implied that I actually have to find a way of getting better rates, better prices, like better products, like exploring the market further, get new customers, maintain a relationship as a kid. So this is one of the things I actually picked up around the way.
Yeah, amazing. So I think the most important part there is ability to sell and like convince other people. Now let's talk about like your transition. You mentioned wanting to be like a reverend father, now studying microbiology. How did you then discover tech where you finally said, "Oh, I'm going to do tech"? What was that transition like for you?
Right. I think from where the way I kind of went through life, I always had this notion that the best plan is a liquid plan. Like it has to be formless. It should be able to change with regards to the environment, your person, your development, the needs and the demands of the prevalent demand at the time. So these are the kind of things I learned early on. When I first went to admission to university, I started reading a lot about management, different kinds of books, try to understand why obviously that stage you're actually developing as a young man, and then you try to be very to understand yourself first of all, to understand the situation, to understand the environment, and then you get to look at life from interesting points of view as you grow throughout life. So one of the things I learned was during my when I first gained admission to university, I was very entrepreneurial. So I had like little businesses in school as a student. So I was generating revenue from the very day one. That when you as a student, you don't rely heavily on your parents sending you money from home. You actually generate your own
Okay.
revenue and you can
Do
actually
you want to tell us some of the business that you did while in school?
sure. So I went to Covenant University, and back then, you know, everybody in Covenant University actually stayed in a hostel, and we had most of the printers were in either college buildings or in the library. So the first thing I did was to start. I had a printer in my room and made it available made it know that people could print their assignments from instead of having to go all the way to the college buildings where there'll be like a long queue. I provided a better proximity to this solution for them, and basically, I even tried to be more competitive. So that saw me doing lots of printouts in the evenings, the night before, and sometimes in the morning when people have to submit their assignments. So who's then send me the come with a flash drive back then, plug it in the system, print it out. I used to generate like a decent amount of money then. And so I started from that. I even scaled that. So I was available in two main hostels. And that's when I met one of my best lifelong friends in that process. So that was kind of like an interesting one. Um, Also, then there's something I did to the side because in Covenants, you wear everybody dressed corporately. So wear ties. So there's a time whereby the most fashionable ties were like slim ties. And that was a transition from having this kind of like a bit fatter ties, that's what we call them. So I found an interesting way of slim fitting ties. Instead of having to discard your old ties to buy a fresh one, you can simply just turn the existing big oversized tie to a slim tie for just 200 naira, and I used to get a lot of ties. So you come to my room, you see like a heap of ties of waiting. So I used to try to make sure that every evening when I'm back from classes, I can do up to 100 per night. And that was something I was trying to do back then. I was generating money from, but then it was too labor intensive. I kind of like stopped that because obviously at some point it started becoming, it just it phase that phase actually just kind of like went naturally. So these are two things I did predominantly. Then as I got to like a little bit more advanced, I then met a couple of my friends and I started playing around tech solutions. So we came together with a solution back then where it's like an online software where we wanted to sell it to universities, sorry, to secondary schools for especially those in boarding schools and even day schools whereby parents can actually monitor the students' performance from tests. and exams, not before it gets to the report card where they get to see like the child came first. So that way we give the goal was to give parents preemptive monitoring before, so they can actually step in case the child is performing poorly in a particular subject. So they could actually get a sense of where the child is, let's say from the midterm exams, from you don't have to wait to the final exams to know that your child is performing poorly in mathematics. So that was the solution we tried to sell. We went out to market, went to different secondary schools. We got like first one or two schools that were pilots. But then one of the challenges we faced was the product front, because we were able to design the website, but I started scaling, started seeing lots of problems, and then it didn't work out. And then most of the schools just went ahead and did it themselves. So this is one of the challenges we faced back then. And I think one of the things that we did that was quite successful was when we launched Grad Day. So Grad Day was, at the time, my close friend that we started working on the printer product together. He came from the UK. And then he came with a solution that, so in the UK, for most universities, when you're graduating, you have like this gowns, you have a scroll, take a picture, print it out, well branded with the school name and logo, and they have it in the house as some kind of like, souvenir. Right. So he said, okay, let's try and replicate that stuff in Covenant at the time. So you have to go through different product iterations. So you have to get photographers, you have to get frames, you have to brand it, and then obviously you have to sell it. So the initial stage was we're trying to sell it to individuals. So during the convocation day, we sold it to individuals. Our goal was to see how we can convert at least 10% of the graduating students, So at the time, the first year it was a massive failure. We did less than 1% of the graduating class because nobody knew us, and it was very clunky. And then there was lots of crowd, and then we couldn't convert. So the second year we went to other schools, and then we started hitting the 10% target. But then it was not accessible to everyone because not everybody could afford it because of the price. And then so the third year we now iterated and I started going directly to the schools. So we now made it part of the souvenirs. And then the first two schools was a massive hit because then we had ample time. Some of the challenges we faced early on was that we didn't have enough time to produce and then ship. So, but then when you work with the schools, you don't have to come on a convocation day. You can come weeks or months before convocation. We get them to give us the list of the graduating students. We take all the pictures. We go back home, we frame, we produce, and then supply it back to the school. So during convocation, they cannot give it to the students. So that's what we're doing when we're in like final year, maybe during service year, we did that. We made decent amounts of revenue on that front. So, and then now I'm seeing it everywhere. Everybody does like, grad day photos. Yeah, kind of like pioneers of this in the space in Nigeria, literally, because we're the first to do it. So these are some of the things we did during the course of time as students, and then obviously with that kind of background and that kind of experience, you just want to do something more because you believe you have the ability to think of solutions, think of problems, provide solutions that can scale. So we've done that I did that throughout university and then coming out into the world. Because after service year, we all agreed that we're going to take a step back on this product because you don't want to be that guy that after convocating 3-4 years ago, you still come to the school for projects and stuff. So we kind of like took a step back and then let other people go into the mix. And then somehow, somewhere along the line, other people came and said they kind of do the same products and then we're fine to let them have the opportunity. So moving to other things. How I came into crypto was a little bit interesting because it was sometime in 2017, 2018. I saw when the Steam blockchain was kind of like having lots of traction at the time. I saw my brother actually was, he was on the Steam blockchain, Steemit, it's a platform called Steemit where you create content and get, rewarded based on the quality of the content and the power of the people that actually support you. So he wrote an article, and I've been hearing about it at the time, but I was not really interested. So what's really intrigued me, the magic moment for me at the time was when he was trying to convert some of the Steam backed dollar into Naira. And then I was there where it happened because he got someone that was going to buy the Steam backed dollar. And I was there in person and I saw he sent it to the person sent Naira to him. Then I knew that, okay, yeah, there is something here. So that was the magic moment. And I went back, started researching about it, started reading about Steemit, started went through other people's articles, lots of quality articles, not so much quality articles as well. And then I started looking at how I can fit into this place. Where can I provide value? Where can I get, where can I bring something that will get me support and obviously try to get more integrated into the ecosystem. So it was kind of like an interesting learning curve for me. And then I plugged in. So I have a little bit of science background, started writing scientific articles on the I think STEM community. And I started getting support. And then that was very interesting for me because at the time I was trying to do like a manufacturing product to the side. And somehow I find myself spending more time on Steemit than on this product we're working on. And then I said, okay, I think it's interesting. And I find myself doubling down on Steemit and trying to go further into the blockchain space.
Yeah, sure. Really, really amazing, journey from how, you started as, a student doing various businesses and now venturing into tech and also like your crypto journey. So I'm curious as to when did you realize, you wanted to build like a product? Was it a situation where you felt, oh, you no longer want to be a consumer and you really wanted to understand, the product side of things? If Steemit can build a product, then probably I can also. What's like your story like?
Right. During the period where I was participating on the Steemit network, I took out some time to go to several events to speak to other people in the space. Most of them at the time were just kind of like speculative engagements on Steemit, Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS at the time. And it was kind of interesting to see most of them were buying coins, holding coins. So it was very interesting when I met someone that was actually building one of the first exchanges at the time, you know, in Nigeria. So it was very interesting for me because what I now did was that I started using that person's platform to be able to swap between any currency I had at the time to local currency. So it was kind of interesting for me. And at the time, I never saw myself building a solution. I was just a user, right? But then as you go further in the space, spend more time interacting with the product. I went from just being a contributor on Steemit to having my first job on Beam. And then I was kind of like, I started out as a Lagos ambassador and later grew to become the African ambassador. And then moving from just on a consumer basis to working with a team from an ambassador point of view and then going to become part of the core team, now gives you insights as to how product actually works. Get me the engineering side of things, get me the product side of things, and get me the operators as well. So that's when I started understanding how kind of like the inner workings of building a company, right? And I quickly became very close to the founders, and to this very day, we're actually connected as friends. So for me, staying close to to the Beam team, and then going further to work with other projects as a marketing manager, and eventually building my first startup. For me, because I was coming to the space with a bit of experience, building solutions, and for me, at the time, I saw crypto and blockchain as an enabler, and I was like, okay, is there a way I can build a solution for this for different markets? Because at the time it was global, so I met one of my close friends that we worked together on a project. I was a marketing manager and then he was like an executive, and then together we collaborated to fund Victory Finance, which was our first startup. So we've been on a blockchain called Podium, and we it was very interesting because we it was a new blockchain, and we were very connected with the CMO. And then, we went through the grants program, we were awarded the grants, and then we made an announcement that we've received a grant from Concordium, and then we're going to be the first project to build a Concordium. And Concordium itself retweeted that tweets, and it was it was amazing because most of Concordium investors reached out, they invested in what we're building, raised what raised well over $2 million, and then we started building, right? So that was our first startup. We raised decent amounts of funding, and I started building the products. And then the best part for me there, apart from fundraised, was that we were able to bring products to market. So we started out with an NFT collection. This was 2021. We had an NFT collection that went on to build lots of like NFTs that people from the chain started buying. So we had NFT that people were call it terrestrial NFT. We had lots of like revenue on that front because that was really interesting. We then went on to build the name service. So we call it concurrent name service, CNS. So the domain was .ccd, and that was another success we had. And then luckily for us, Concordon, because we had like Concordon name service, they actually bought that product. That's Concordon Foundation actually bought the product, and that was how I exited that startup. So having that experience, I wanted more managerial experience because I operated the startup from just being a marketing manager. So kind of like elevated I was still my status at the time from marketing manager to a co-founder, and then going on to raise money, build the product, and getting exited. So I wanted to have like a proper um, experience working for a more mature company, and that's what led me to Candy Network. So Candy Network was being on Polkadot. The team was kind of like they're going through an interesting time, having had like a massive success building and now seeing the project raising a lot of money, and then that releasing a token that went as high as over $2 billion, in fully diluted market cap at one point. So I was coming to a project that has gone through a very prosperous phase and was struggling. So I had to do a lot of work in terms of, first of all, creating a good relationship with the community, speaking to the ultras because they're like community members that started working for the project for free because they wanted to support the project, and trying to see how, because now the pressure was now became that you need to launch a product. So that was where the point I came in, trying to see how we can build a product because Candy was trying to be an oracle on the Polkadot ecosystem, and they were trying to see how we can. Oracle had a very talented engineer that actually worked on it, and then we're trying to see how we can get that product to first of all secure a patching slot on Usama, and then eventually on Polkadot, then deploying the product, and you'll see how other chains or other parachains in Polkadot can actually plug into it. So that was what we're trying to do. That's what I was trying to do at the time. And it was a very interesting period for me because I went through the notion, lots of community engagement, both good and bad. It's kind of really interesting. So while I was working on Carlin, because the owners of Carlin is like a venture studio, so they have other projects attached to the studio. So we succeeded in getting like a Polkadot patching status. We secured that. I think we had about $1.1 million in locked dot. And then so they now said, okay, we need to move to a different project. So I was moved to Glacier Network within the same venture studio. And at Glacier, we're trying to build composable databases for three teams. We now went from being just a product in testnet. We had partnership with Rwave, IPFS, BNB in Greenfield, and then we raised a bit of funds. But then obviously it's a venture studio. I was just kind of like an employee. I beat an executive, but then the founders actually have control over these resources. So this was the period where I started thinking about, because at the time, this was like 2022, 2023, I started looking at the local space because all my experience, all my interaction on the blockchain space was actually on a global front. I was not kind of looking at the local context. I was seeing lots of plays going into this into the mix. And then I was losing value. There were lots of things happening in the Nigerian front. I think that was around the first crypto ban. So it was kind of like really, really interesting. I was like, there has to be a solution. So I looking at it from a very curious point of view, trying to see how is there somewhere is there a problem? Is there where we can, you know, are there challenges that are pressing that I can use my experiences to actually create a solution to solve those problems? And that was really interesting because somehow, somewhere along the lines, I actually found something that has actually become, that we actually captured in Funeral.
Yeah, really, really amazing journey. Thanks for going deep into like the journey. And one of the things that basically, stood out to me was the fact that you had work experience as a founder, which eventually sort of like built your network and then connected you while you were trying to build your own journey. What can you say to founders starting out? Do you think founders should go solo or they should have actual work experience in the industry to sort of like build their network? What's your take on that?
I know nothing. I can't say anything to anybody right now.
Okay,
I can only give you my own point of view, but my own point of view
absolutely.
as what. Yeah, so the only thing I can say is when you're doing When you want to go far, go with someone. If you want to go fast, go alone. Right. So it depends on what you're building. If you're trying to get a product to market because it's a unique opportunity you need to capture ASAP and you have the resources to get it done, go solo. But then if you're trying to build a product that lasts, then you might want to have as much partners as possible, which we're willing to share the risk and the rewards with. So I think on that front, you can have like a co-founder. And that's what I've always thought about, building a company. It's really, really, really long. It's depressing. It comes with wins and lots of L's that I have a daily thing I do every day now, whereby at the end of every business day, I just get on the phone with my co-founder and then we talk. And we talk about everything. It's like therapy. That's the only therapy we know, and that's the only therapy we can afford. It's really really difficult. He goes on the front of the product side, which is relatively, I'll say, interesting because there's a lot of challenges he actually goes through daily because we have a live product. So we have live users resources, anything that goes wrong, And then on my own side, I'm trying to get to like working with partners, trying to raise funds, So it's kind of like really, really interesting. But obviously, we're in the same boat. So he asks me what's going on the fundraising front. I said, okay, we have this meeting lined up here, this and that and that. So it's um it's an interesting balance. You have to figure out what works for you. There are people that actually work better alone, where they can actually dig deep, lock in, and just get things done both on the engineering front, on the operational partnership fundraising front. If you're that person, awesome. And now with the advent of AI now, that becomes a little bit more interesting because you can do a lot more without having to have a second person or second opinion because you can actually access that right now. So, but then I actually value human interactions and having somebody, you know, beside you that you guys going to work together. To be honest, I think I value that much. So it depends on what find each founder's situation, what they're building, and a personality.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to like get your thoughts on like the lessons that you learned in the corporate world that you basically took into like, building your own startup because I think that made a lot of sense to me how that it was the network of people that you had that sort of like helped you even in your journey while building, your own um product in any case. Do you still want to touch on that or like
Yeah, sure. One thing I learned from one of the founders of Beam was take every call, right? As if you're not a technical person, take every call. So you have someone that wants to reach out to you, they have a product. Listen, you're not paying for it, except you're paying for that meeting, then it's a different time. So that's one of the things I learned because when you take as much calls as possible, you start having you don't have to know everything, but then you now start having an idea of everything. So if there's something that comes under your purview, you have an idea of how it works. Because if you heard this from someone saying something at one call that you just, chimed in and stood as a fly on the wall and you listened in. So that's one of the things I actually picked up from working with other founders in the space. And then one of the most important things I learned is the ability to um, create a bit of, I'll say, FOMO in the sense that before you release a product, kind of like anticipate the release of that product. It's either you do that publicly or amongst partners. And it's very important because you don't want to release a product today and then expect people to start using it. So you want to inform like the target audience about what you're building if you have those target audience. But if you don't have them, you need to start creating that audience. And one of the easiest ways to create that audience is by building it public. So it's talking about what you're going to build and how far you're going in terms of like the development. So create a bit of excitement and a bit of anticipation for your upcoming products, upcoming releases, and that's something that I believe is very valuable. And obviously, I cannot stress enough the importance of relationships because they're everything. You may not need to get if you all you need to do to get to a president is just one or two persons, right? Takes you to the biggest, most powerful being in any part of the world or on the global stage. So having strong relationships with people, having profound relationship with people is very important. People that you've met, stay in contact with them. Try to have check up on them. That people, because one of the beautiful thing about this our space is that you have connection around the world, and then things are happening around the world. So if you find yourself, you have connections in one part of the world that perhaps are going through a turbulent time, you can reach out and say, how's everything going? It could just be a simple telegram message, and then that's care, that concern actually goes along with. So having that relationship, one, and then kind of like reaching out and engaging people from time to time actually helps. So it's all about relationships. I can tell you that people that I've never met, they've actually sent me value, and actually has we've gone to rooms where I was not there, and they've actually stood for me, and that's kind of like translated to value actually to everything has to. So I cannot stress enough the importance of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Now let's talk about Fina, right? And what you're building at Fina. Walk me through like the very first version of Fina, right? And now, there's Fina version 2. What's the difference between version 1 and version 2? What technically changed? Tell us the difference between these two and like what we should expect.
Right. The first version of FINA was very crude. We called it the calculator. At the time, we saw the massive debasing of the naira. We had lots of naira was losing value almost on a daily basis, and we thought about a solution that can enable people that hold stable coins to still maintain their stable coin position while gaining exposure to local currency, which is naira. We thought about it in terms of um, lock your stable coins with FINA, get liquid currency, execute, and then if you can repay the loan, that's awesome. If you cannot repay the loan, the position will get liquidated. There's a 90% loan to value ratio, the remaining 10% to be liquidated. So that was the simple idea. Luckily for me, I have a CTO that has good experience. So in a single weekend, we put together like a proof of concept. That proof of concept went ahead to do over close to 100 transactions in the first week. So at that point, that's when I knew, okay, we have something we've built something that users want. We went ahead to raise a family and friends round, raise about 100K, family, friends, and angel. And then that's kind of like became the beginning of building the first version of the product. Um, Obviously, while building the product, you get to interact with the users. That's what I do because at the early days, it was very interesting because most of our users, I knew them on first name basis. So basically, these are people I know that needed to find and go to their DMs, I'll call them up, I'll walk them through the product. So we had people coming back almost on a daily basis. So at the point where we knew we were up to something, was when we now realized that more people were actually getting signed up on FINA that we're not familiar with their names. So I see people that some random names coming taking big positions and then realize, wow, we're actually growing. So that was some of the signs we saw in the early days. So we now kept on speaking to our users, asking them some of the what would they like to see more on FINA, what would be the products that FINA, what would be the one thing that FINA would do for them that we see that would translate to value for them. One of the feedbacks we had that was kind of recurring was that so when they take a loan from FINA against the stable coins and then they use the money for whatever reasons, they have more stable coins, but then they need to swap to be able to close that position because we've actually saved them value. If we can enable them to go between stable coins and local currency, that would be awesome. And we did that in a single weekend. And then that's became a product that clearly see FINA said that capturing more value on top of the loan solution we had. So obviously from that point on, I got to realize the importance of speaking to your users regularly. So we have like, as you grow to like right now we're over 10,000 users, you cannot speak to all 10,000 of users. So you speak to your power users that actually use regularly and get to do lots different size of transactions on your platform. So get those relationship with them, try to interact with them as much as you can, try to give them white glove service literally. So and that's what we've been doing. So yeah, I think that's the two versions of the product. So coming into this year, we now thought about that some of the metric that is very important to us is how long does it take a user when they get signed up on FINA to complete their first transaction, right? So the time has always been a couple of days, and then our goal is to see how we can drive that days to just hours. And then one of the things I started looking at inwardly was that what is the product like? How often do people use the product? Do they only use us when they want to on and off ramp? What other services can we provide to them that once they come on the app today, they can do their first transaction, and then we started innovating around that. So the new version of FINA is more or less like Fina becoming a proper neobank that can enable users to do everyday transactions on Fina. And that is what we succeeded in doing so far. We have users using Fina on a daily basis. Our average time to first transaction has dropped incredibly. And we're not getting close to the hours um, um, basis. But then right now, we now have users using Fina regularly for various transactions, and it's the progress of it.
Yeah, amazing. And thank you very much for, the breakdown. While I was like doing my research, I saw like the product suite between personal and business. Do you want to sort of like touch on the difference and why like users should like care on like this product suite?
Right. So for the products, I cannot disclose much about the business side of things because we have a product line coming that addresses that perfectly. But just to give you something on this conversation is that last year we did about $75 million in volume processed. And the majority of that funds, so that transaction came from merchants. So we have merchants that we've been interacting with for the past 6 to 8 months, and then they use Fina as their settlement layer, right? So what we're not trying to do, we're creating a solution for them, that tends to that specific use case. So, and that's the reason why we're not turning the Fina experience as it is currently for just customers. So users can do more with their stablecoins, whereas businesses can do a lot more. We have tools coming, in the next few days or weeks that will be specific to businesses that they can do a lot more there, on the application. So, for the customer side of things, which I can speak freely on, you can do your swap, you can still enable your loans. For the loans, we're actually adding new features to the loan product where users can actually earn yields based on the position. So if you take a loan right now, there's no yield, just take you open a position, you get local currency, and that's that. So what we want to introduce is users can actually take a loan, that collateral can start generating yield for them. And then at the end of the loan duration, they'll have yields that's accrued in duration of the loan. And then trying to make stablecoins available for various transactions. You can buy airtime, you can do data, and whatever stuff it is, so that users can go from on- onboarding Fina and doing the transaction the next segment. Right. So these are things we kind of like have done on the Fina on the customer front to make that more easy.
Yeah, really, really amazing, right? I'm sure like this time next week we'll be getting like more information on like the new features coming out. So I think it's more like business to business, right? Providing solution to B2B, or businesses, on large scale. My next question revolves around where do you see Fina in the next 5 years? Having processed like over $75 million dollars, where do you see this number in the next 5 years? And yeah, can you also touch on how Fina makes money, like revenue itself?
Yeah. We have a very ambitious goal in terms of VLC in the next 5 years. But then the goal is to see how we can survive those 5 years. So um, we have to look at the climate right now. Things are very, very interesting. The goal is that we have enough resources to be able to live out this period. But I think the most important thing for us is the direction we're going towards on the product front. It's very important to us. So on the product front, we want to be the de facto app people use for beyond stablecoins, like your neobank, your fintech solution. We want to make it as clean as possible. We have a very solid team to actually put together like very solid products that user use regularly. In terms of like the plan, we have a very ambitious plan, like I mentioned, but then I don't want to speak to that in detail because it will let a lot of cats out of the bag in terms of what we're actually trying to build. But I think that will come out in detail.
Yeah, I guess you are using like the FOMO in real time. You want to do like some FOMO for like the users. Amazing, amazing. Now, I also touched on like how Fina basically makes money, right? Revenue, and I also want you to touch on like what you think about revenue generation for like startups. How should you know people approach it? What's like your playbook?
So I can't go in detail on how Fina makes money, but what I can say is that founders can approach revenue from various points. Uh, Before now, um, there was something that was prevalent in the past where people give their services for free for you to use and then you convert later. And then over the years, we got to see that that doesn't work because once you give something for free, they assume you should stay free. So one of the things we did while being Fina was that from our very first user, we started generating revenue from the very first user. So, and that's something we've always had at the back of our mind that if it's not making money, it's not making sense. Because at the end of the day, you have investors that want to see an exit or they want to get acquired and they want higher returns on their investment. And if you're giving out, if you're giving, well, like basically we have that in back of our heads that we have to generate revenue from the very, very first transaction and that we succeeded. But then founders should think of revenue generation as early as possible. One of the things I like saying is that you can't use the Silicon Valley model that you have a lot of cash to burn through to get to PMF or value revenue generation. We don't have that luxury. You know, it's really difficult to raise funds in this climate, and then obviously not to speak about the continent as a whole. So you don't have that luxury of having like 24 months runway to trying to figure out how you can make money. You just need to get out of the door and start making revenue as soon as you can. So you need to prioritize revenue and then find the first set of customers as quickly as possible. So I think that's what I can see on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now let's talk about Chiss Protocol, right? Where does this fit in the larger vision? You already talked about FINA and what you're building at FINA. Now, where do we fit in Chiss Protocol, and how does it fit in like the vision and the mission you're building at FINA?
Right. So Cheese was an R&D product. We are building an Avalanche. The goal was to try to see how we can build a protocol first solution that connects, that can be the infrastructure layer that fintechs, web3 products can actually use for on-chain settlement in real time. So it was an R&D product. It's experimental. We fully developed the protocol. It's fully developed and is ready, and that's the development phase is complete. So I think on that front, we've actually used the protocol. So going to market is something that is really interesting. But then our focus this year is FINA as against Chips.
Okay, that's really cool. Now, I want to understand like your work-life balance thesis, how you see balancing work and life, because over the years you've been building. You've built Fina, you've also like built Cheese as like an R&D project. How did you manage or combine all of these things together? And what's like your work-life balance thesis?
I don't know what that thing is. I don't know what this is. It's just work. So when you wake up, that's when you start work. You close work when you go to bed. If you're not on your system and your phone, you're trying to follow up a conversation, you receive an email, you want to respond as quickly as possible. If you're on a call, if you make 10 calls, nine of the calls are actually business related. So I'm not a corporate, so I can't really talk about work-life balance. I just know of work. And unfortunately for me, work is 24 hours. You close your system when you know you're fully spent and you want to rest or you have something pressing that take you away from your workspace. So work-life balance is for rich people. And that, my friend, I don't qualify.
That's really, really interesting. You said work-life balance is for rich people. That's my friend. I do not qualify. I mean, I'm still going to get to that, but in any case, let's talk about what sacrifices do people not see, right? While you are building. Do you want to share with us, what sacrifice people don't see?
So the way I think of this is that the sacrifices um we don't have many if you don't succeed, right? So I am a co-founder. We both have like stable, high income jobs before FINA, and then having to let go of that to build it. and go to zero, literally, it's it's these are massive personal sacrifices, but it will not mean anything if we don't get to a point where we can call finite success. So I can't start speaking about sacrifices in detail when we're not there yet. So we'll see if it was a good sacrifice or a stupid decision at the end of it. But then our goal is to see how we can turn that to be something we can talk about in the future in totality. But for now, is we'll see.
Yeah, amazing. So you've been talking about your co-founder, for quite a bit, right? And some met their co-founders on Reddit, like Coinbase, and some people met their co-founder through an hackathon. Do you want to tell us the role of finding a good co-founder and how it's important for a company's success? What was like your um approach to finding a co-founder?
Yeah, so finding a good co-founder or finding a co-founder, you need to understand that it has to be someone that you guys are on the same page. It doesn't matter the kind of person he is, you guys have to be on the same page. And this is someone you trust, this is someone you can go to war with, this is someone that when you're shot in on the battlefield, we leave you and retreats, or will he carry you and you guys retreat together, or you carry you forward and you guys would get killed in battle, right? So there are different aspects to finding a co-founder. It depends on what you want. But one of the things I look for in finding a co-founder is someone that's because in my previous startup, my first startup, we were both non-technical. So I prioritize having someone technical, on this front and someone that has a head on the shoulder that can actually push back on some kind of if we have ideas, can actually go and say, I want us to do this, and then we actually go through the notion of like kind of like make cases for our ideas and trying to see which one goes through. So basically, someone that is what their onions, and then someone that you guys are agreeable, so you guys can agree on a lot of things, but then you guys are real in terms of like, cause it's going to get hard, it's going to get tough, and then someone you like. I said that about a year ago. That's if you're building something important with someone you despise, that is a recipe for disaster because when things go south, you'll be like, I'm not expressing you. I'm not trying to find a resolution. I don't care. Like, we've seen it a lot of times that, and you've seen stats that comes out that most of the challenges founders have is disagreement between co-founders. Luckily for us, we don't have that. That's because we are both aligned. There's like where we want to go to, how we're going about things. And then we made the effort to become friends in the process because we talk every day, like I said. If like I know that right now we're heavy on the product front, and I'm now focusing more on partnerships and speaking to partnership across all fronts. We don't speak as much as we would when things are not so kind of like product partnership centric. So then we get to work more and then we get to speak more. But now we speak once or twice a day because of where we're at in terms of like our product roadmap. So um, but they'll make the effort to see weekends, right? We're both in the same city, so we get to hang out, go to friends' house, we go out a lot. So that way we know we are well connected. So in between our social conversations, we're having business discussions. And that way we actually well in tune. So even sometimes you feel like there are things that maybe that he can give me a summary of how he had a couple of calls with engineers and how it went and what he thinks. And then I can tell him that, oh, I had this XYZ conversation that you're not there, and this is what the person thinks. So, and then we both represent each other's interests. So, and which is FINA in this case because we both want to succeed. So, for us, the things that, for me, things I value are obviously the technical ability, the because we're going to war literally. Like we speak to each other more than we speak to anybody else in our lives. And if there is one or two pieces missing in terms of compatibility, that might be an issue. So if you're looking for a co-founder, you want someone that's well aligned with you on many levels. And when you have that alignment, and you guys can actually agree on disagreements because it's a very essential part of finding a co-founder. Yeah, I think that would be a very good co-founder to have, and you guys both understand where you are.
Yeah, right. Now I'm more curious on like where did you meet your co-founder? Was it on Reddit? Was it at an event? That type of story.
at a wedding.
Interesting.
Yeah. So his twin sister was getting married. I was the best man for the husband. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess you guys just kicked off the conversation, and the rest is history.
No, we did not. I saw him
Oh,
like once or twice, but I got to realize that how important he was in the family and how it was an interesting it was an interesting I don't see it was very interesting because we met once, twice in and around the wedding, but then there was something about him that was interesting, and I guess there's something about him that he found interesting. And after the wedding, he reached out and said, "Hey, how far? Like, do you have? Let's think of X, Y, Z. Let's just talk." Which we did, and then we had a conversation. One conversation led to two conversations, led to a couple of other things to decide, and then when the idea for Fina came, I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I want to work on this thing. What do you think?" And then that's right. That's what.
yeah, really, really amazing. So that means we can get to meet whatever partner at any type of event. We just have to look inward, right? Really, really interesting. Now, it brings me to like my next question of fundraising, right? What's your playbook? I'm sure this is like something you've done, quite a number of times, because you mentioned from like your first product and even the next one and the next one. What can you say African founders are getting wrong, or what you think is the playbook, right?
I don't think African founders are doing anything wrong. I've met a great core of founders that are hardworking, talented, building amazing products. I just believe, and that's my conviction, that we don't have enough resources, enough investors in the space. And that's just my conviction because from where I sit, like most of the resources coming to the continent to fund tech startups, a decent amount of them is coming from outside the continent. And, so I don't think there's any playbook or rule that African founders are not doing stuff. We have unicorns in Africa, be it in fintech. So it means there's something happening there. If you look at these fintechs, most of the investors are actually non-Africans. So I think one of the things I am happy to see that fundraising, there are lots of funds in Africa, but then they're not enough. We need to have a great score of them, and then we have the capacity for this to have this because I'll give an example. Um, a government should be able to have like VC, like its tech ecosystem that have like a fund dedicated to giving grants to enterprising entrepreneurs. They have innovative solutions. So they could be that arm of um, grants on a state level while the country. So let's say, for example, founders in Delta they don't have to come to Lagos to look for investors or to look for opportunities. They can have some program that actually enables them to get them like the first 5K, the first 10K to test out the ideas. It doesn't have to be an investor investing first off. So for an investor, it only makes sense for investors to come in when the product virtually de-risks a lot of risks attached to every product. Because believe me when I tell you that every idea is not venture packable, right? So it goes from the different stages, different cycles of being a product. This is really come when it can scale, right? And at that point, it gets interesting because you as a founder, you need to be able to understand like, products, the market, what are the things you've learned, what are the risks you've taken, who has backed you all the way, who are people that have taken this risk. So there are a lot of things that goes into fundraising for once to just put a blanket and say founder should do X, Y, Z, right? So some of this initial, like what I did for Fina was we had the idea, we tested it out, we have like a bit of resources, we tested out the product, just put the initial POC, it made sense. We leverage our network to get the first set of users were using it, it made sense. We leverage our network to get that angel and family and friends round. So that way we got to the point where I moved the product from being just an idea, being just a POC to an MVP. And now we've got this product that's to a point where I can handle a decent volume of transactions. Now we can ask, okay, we want to reach out to investors for investments, right? So we believe, we're convinced that our product is actually fund PMF and then we can scale. So for that, we need investment, right? So that may not be the case for every founder. And obviously, is for you to, as a founder, to figure out what is the best route to surviving before you can test this product in the market to see if it can scale and then to see if VCs that can back you. Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into building the products and getting backing. It's very, very it's too simple for you to just put a blanket on it and say founders are not doing this. Founders, African founders are super talented. I just wish there was more resources for all.
Yeah, I think I love your opinion around like it has to come internally first, where like even the nation itself, what's like the nation doing? Because most of the funds are coming from like the external part of the world. And how are we like as a nation trying to even support our own builders with resources? I think this is like a really big one for me to go home and think of. Um, which is why I think that people working in the Web3 space, right, have to also think about like the long term game where I'm working for a particular protocol. Um, I'm getting like salary for what is what, and I'm also looking to like angel invest into like some actual protocols building stuff in this part of the world. That way, we are supporting, ourselves and pushing forward for the global, um, yeah, for like global transformation, as the case may be. Really, really interesting. I think I love that part so much, and leveraging like your network, um, first validating the product, and also like leveraging your your network. Now it brings me to the next question. What are you most proud of so far? What are you most proud of so far?
Uh, is it my journey at FINA? It's,
Yeah, generally.
uh, that's a very, very broad question. And just putting an answer would be unfair, I would say. Uh, well, I don't know how to. I don't know how to. I don't know if I have an answer for that. But I think I'll just push it towards the final point, final. I'll say final point of my life. So I'd say for FINA, I think the most my what I'm most proud of for FINA is that we've survived for about 2 years now. We've gone through various cycles of the product evolution. We have backers, and then we'll get to the point where the products we brought the product to market that solve the problem. I'm proud of how far we've come as a team and as a project. But then I'm really, really curious to see where we go from.
Yeah, really, really amazing. That's beautiful. And it brings me like to the final question where if FINA succeeds at scale, right? What changes for Africa, right? Or what does success look for you personally? You know,
Success for me personally would be an exit. So scale to the point where you're a unicorn, like over $1 billion in valuation, and then we get exited. We can exit as founders, either by an IPO or an acquisition. I think that to me that will be success. That will be success because on that front you provided returns for investors. You have all your employees that actually stay with you throughout the journey. You've actually gotten some kind of decent that stock options would have converted to some kind of like decent, maybe life changing money. I think to me that'll be the success. I think so.
yeah. So the last but not the least, right? So while you were mentioning this, it sort of like occurred to me that do you want to share one of your biggest lesson building FINA, the biggest lesson you've learned building FINA?
Uh, that's a good question, though. The biggest lesson, right? So I think what I can think of hand right now is okay. One of the biggest lessons is actually learning from other people. One of the benefits of being a founder is that you have other founders as friends. I speak to them regularly, from time to time, see them at events. Some you have deeper relationships with, the others maybe not. And with that comes with some kind of insights. So you get to relate to people a lot more. So when you hear people's stories, you have two options. You learn from them or you take it as gist, right? So for me, I tend to lean more towards the learning curve. Like, okay, this founder did XYZ, this founder is XYZ, this founder has launched XYZ, this founder is struggling with XYZ. If if I'm close to the founder, I get to ask them a question that if you're to doing this, if you're to do this all over again, what would you do differently? If not, obviously, I'll imagine that for myself and try to figure out a solution to that and or the answer to that, and then have that solution in my head to make sure when it happens to me, I've thought about and have a solution for that. So I would say the yeah, I think that the biggest lesson is like learning from other people's challenges and being open to supporting founders as well because it's something that has is kind of like an open rule or kind of like a golden rule that we founders have, like where you can provide support and value, do that because we've actually received such, value, and then obviously we're happy to do that for other founders, which we've done. So it's just kind of like it's very collaborative, and I'm struggling to answer your question because I've not really thought about it. So, yeah, but the one thing I can see so far is that learn from other people's mistakes. It doesn't have to happen to you for you to learn from it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think we can, relate it back to what you said about, listening, right? Being able to listen to feedback from your users, um, sort of like shapes how you build the product, which is how you've also built, Fina version 2, by listening to like the feedback from users and whatnot, Thank you very much, for the insights. It's been like an amazing one. So before we sort of like round up, right? Want to move to like the break the block session where I sort of like ask two questions, no overthinking, right? Just answer. If you had like abundant capital, which African Web3 startup would you invest in and why? That's the first one.
Okay. Uh, Fina.
Oh, you don't have to mention your company actually.
Ah, ah, I can't respond here.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So the second part is for security or for like treasury security. Which one would you prefer? Hardware wallet or multi-sigs?
Multi-sig. Because
Okay.
multi-sigs. Personally.
Interesting. Multi-sig. Okay. If you permit me, one just came to my head right now, right? Which is, and that's because you did not have like an answer for the first one, or you choose to like skip, which would be, um, we've been seeing a lot of people build, payment solutions and all of that. What other verticals do you think people can look into, especially like in the Web3 space?
So I think in recent time, I've been looking at real world solutions that have to do with hardware. And I don't have any particular niche. It's something I want to start. I've actually started reading on recently. So if we can start having more hardware solutions, either robots or machines, you saw Terra with the drones. So that's something that recently started coming to mind. And obviously, with AI, you can see how I can integrate Web3 money, stablecoins, Bitcoin is internet money. If you can integrate some kind of like payments on that front, it makes it interesting. So I think hardware, because I did something on the hardware front some years back. So we had like an inverter system where it's like a side project. So we had inverters where people can hire and use in their homes, and they don't have to own it; to just pay money for it. So a solution like that, right now, if we can integrate a way where they can pay for it without having to send money to us. Maybe they can just transfer stable coins to punch the code or put some scan some this thing for the other for it to pay for inverter once it's you're out of your subscription. Something like that to be interesting. So I would say hardware is something that I've been looking at, and maybe who knows, I might just get hopefully Fina exits very soon. I can start investing in hardware solutions. That might be the answer to the first question.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think hardware too is great because myself, And some of my friends have also been thinking about like wearable AIs or like AIs that can take notes in the real world.
Mm.
You're in a meeting or you're doing something at an event. The AI can record your meeting notes, and you can just take it wherever for students in the university or whatever. So I think that's really really great. And so we have come to like the end of the podcast, right? Thank you so much, AG, for sharing your journey and your insights as a founder. One of the things that has also like stood with me, stayed with me, is like the fact that you have to be able to listen, join every call, and you wouldn't know. It sort of like keeps you a loop of being aware, such that when certain conversations are going on, you are not out of box, right? You are, in the know. Um, the ability to like build FOMO and also building great relationship. And I really love your journey of how you sort of like wanted to be like a reverend father, and how you sort of studied microbiology, and a really really great salesperson, and that has shown in the growth of FINA so far. Thank you so much, right? So yeah, if this conversation made you curious about what AG and the team are building, be sure to follow him on X and check out Fina. Head over to the website, which I'm going to be showing on the screen. And also, if you found this conversation valuable, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel for more conversations as this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode.
Thanks for having me, and
Yeah, bye.